Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez dodged Ben Shapiro for 8 long years, but tonight, trapped under the glaring studio lights by a relentless series of yes or no questions, her carefully crafted defenses crumbled for the entire world to see. For nearly a decade, she weaponized the term name-calling to justify her absolute refusal to share a stage with him. It was a highly effective and convenient shield, one that allowed her to avoid sitting across from a man who doesn't deal in political theater, but rather in brutal binary inquiries. Within the first 90 seconds of this historic broadcast, an audience of 8 million viewers instantly grasped exactly why she had been running. She wasn't fleeing because Shapiro is inherently mean or a typical playground bully. She was running because he demands a simple yes or no. For the clapback queen, a political superstar boasting nearly 10 million followers, a woman who has seemingly never lost a verbal sparring match on cable television, answering in the binary is a tactical nightmare. A yes inevitably spawns the next perilous question. A no triggers the exact same trap. This relentless chain of logical progression inevitably leads to the very corner she had spent 8 years desperately avoiding. Tonight, she finally arrived at the destination she feared, and within moments, she likely wished she could have kept running for another 8 years. The battleground featured a minimalist setup, 2 chairs, 2 microphones, and a suffocating 8 years of unresolved tension suspended heavily between them. This unprecedented invitation materialized through a CNN special event purportedly focusing on the broader future of progressive politics. The framing was intentionally wide, providing AOC's handlers with the necessary political cover to accept the invitation without explicitly conceding they were finally giving in to Shapiro's demands. Yet, every politically aware citizen in America recognized the true nature of the event. This was the debate. She arrived armed to the teeth. Her team had spent 3 grueling days in intense preparation, meticulously analyzing every known rapid-fire sequence Shapiro possessed, mapping out every conceivable rhetorical snare. Their defensive strategy was crystal clear, absolutely refused to play his game. Under no circumstances was she to answer a binary question directly. Instead, she was instructed to expand every single response into a sweeping, emotionally resonant paragraph. She needed to control the clock, dictating the tempo to ensure the encounter felt like a philosophical conversation rather than a ruthless cross-examination. That meticulously crafted strategy survived for exactly 4 minutes. AOC initiated the evening exactly as she navigates every public appearance, radiating standing energy, projecting absolute moral clarity, and utilizing the distinct rhythmic cadence of a leader who has spent 7 years mastering the art of transforming a sterile committee room into a roaring political rally. She spoke passionately about systemic inequality, the housing crisis, and the struggles of working families within her district who fundamentally deserve a better life. Notably, she refused to make eye contact with her opponent. Instead, she locked her gaze directly onto the camera lens. The camera has always been her true audience, her most potent weapon, and historically, that weapon had never misfired. Only after establishing her dominance did she finally turn to him, executing a subtle but deliberate tilt of the chin. "I want to address the elephant in the room," she declared confidently. "Mr. Shapiro has been begging for this debate since 2018. He even offered a $10,000 bounty. I flatly said no, and I rightfully compared his aggressive demands to name-calling. I stand firmly by that assessment today, because when a man aggressively demands your time and feels inherently entitled to your response, the terminology for that toxic behavior remains unchanged." The live gallery erupted in applause. The name-calling narrative had been successfully deployed, field-tested, and optimized for viral consumption. It was the exact maneuver that had protected her for years. Shapiro did not even flinch. In fact, he possessed the calm, calculating demeanor of a predator who had just been handed the exact piece of bait he required. The Congresswoman asserts that I am not entitled to her time, he responded, his voice dangerously even. She is absolutely right about that. But her 720,000 constituents absolutely are. They compensate her with a $174,000 annual salary. This is not name-calling, Congresswoman. This is the United States Congress, and in Congress, serious questions demand serious answers. So let's stop dodging and get to the answers. He didn't offer a microsecond of pause. He immediately lunged into the first substantive inquiry, understanding perfectly well that pauses are the fertile soil where a politician's rhetoric takes root. Shapiro fills every conversational void with his next sentence, and that next sentence is universally a binary question. You introduced the Green New Deal in 2019. Exactly how much does it cost? Her response was the exact prepackaged statement her team had drilled into her. The Green New Deal, she argued, was a visionary framework for critical future investments, not a rigid line-item budget. Therefore, asking for a specific price tag was fundamentally the wrong question to be asking. How much does it cost? Shapiro repeated, utilizing the exact same words, completely ignoring her attempt to reframe the narrative. He asked it again as if she hadn't spoken at all, precisely because she had offered a philosophical paragraph when a hard mathematical figure was required, and a paragraph is not a number. The American Action Forum projected a staggering $93 trillion over a 10-year period, Shapiro continued, tightening the net. You confidently introduced a legislative resolution carrying a potential $93 trillion burden, yet you fundamentally failed to include a basic cost estimate. You provided zero funding mechanisms and mapped out absolutely no implementation timeline. In any other professional industry on earth, pitching a $93 trillion enterprise without a financial estimate is grounds for severe malpractice. Inside the halls of Congress, however, it merely functions as an excuse for a press conference. It begs a question that I promise you the GAO should actively be investigating. Can a sitting representative legitimately introduce legislation boasting a $93 trillion economic impact without conducting a shred of fiscal analysis? In the private sector, that proposal is instantly thrown in the trash. In your world, it just garners more Instagram followers. Before the shockwave of the first trap could fully dissipate, he advanced to the second. Every question acted as a rhythmic strike. Every non-answer served as a brief rest, and those rests were rapidly diminishing. In 2019, he stated, "You famously claimed, and I quote, 'The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change.' That was exactly 7 years ago. Are we currently 5 years away from the literal apocalypse?" She attempted to dismiss it quickly, arguing it was merely a rhetorical device meant to highlight urgency. So Shapiro pounced. The statement was factually false the moment it left your mouth. You deliberately weaponized a known false statement to justify the most exorbitantly expensive policy proposal in the history of the American government, a proposal whose cost you still cannot articulate. Worse yet, you weaponized that fabricated deadline in official campaign fundraising materials. Your campaign actively dispatched emails citing this impending 1-2-year doomsday. Donors desperately handed over their hard-earned money because they genuinely believed the world was ending. The world was not ending. You were fully aware it was not ending, yet you deliberately monetized that deception. There is a specific legal terminology for soliciting financial contributions based on a claim you know to be unequivocally false, Congresswoman. In the realm of federal campaign finance law, it is distinctly referred to as material misrepresentation. The impact of that specific phrase altered the entire atmosphere of the room. This was no longer a standard rapid-fire debate tactic. It was the precise invocation of a legal standard. Material misrepresentation is the exact statutory language the Federal Election Commission utilizes when financial donors are actively defrauded. Shapiro, who is not a district attorney nor a politician, but a Harvard Law valedictorian who analyzes federal statutes with the same ease others read the morning news, had flawlessly constructed a rigid legal framework around what appeared to be a standard political dispute. The ambient temperature in the gallery noticeably plummeted. You have formally introduced 42 pieces of legislation over your 7-year tenure, he continued relentlessly. Exactly how many of those bills were actually signed into law? 3 agonizing seconds of absolute silence hung in the air. 0. You have collected $1.2 million in taxpayer salary to legislate, yet you have functionally legislated nothing. Meanwhile, those very bills you introduced, the ones you knew were destined to die in committee, were heavily featured in massive fundraising blasts as concrete evidence of your fight. You raised millions of dollars off phantom legislation you knew would not pass. Is that genuine political fighting? Or is that just lucrative marketing because the FEC holds very strict opinions on the difference between the two? The ensuing sequence struck incredibly deep, extracting political vulnerability from a vein heavily tied to federal compliance statutes. You have stated on camera on multiple occasions that capitalism is irredeemable. That is a direct quote. Do you still stand by that absolute assertion? She attempted to pivot, stating she stood by her overarching critique of an inherently flawed system that produces widespread inequality. Yes or no? Shapiro interrupted. Is capitalism irredeemable in its current structural form? Yes or no? The live audience collectively held its breath, watching a seasoned politician desperately attempting to transform a locked door into an escape route. The question presented only 2 exits, and she was frantically searching for a non-existent third. A yes meant she fundamentally opposed the very economic system her constituents rely upon to survive. A no meant she had been shamelessly lying to her radical base for 7 years, harvesting millions of dollars based on a fabricated ideological stance. I will accept your hesitation as a resounding yes, Shapiro concluded. Now let's look at the data. Your campaign war chest accumulated a staggering $15.4 million in just the first half of 2025, primarily utilizing ActBlue. ActBlue is a private, aggressively for-profit technology platform that processes financial donations and takes a healthy percentage off the top. That is the literal definition of a capitalist transaction. Your official campaign merchandise store peddles tax-the-rich sweatshirts for $58 a pop, another textbook capitalist transaction. You amassed over $15 million utilizing the exact same economic system you publicly brand as irredeemable. And this is exactly where it ceases to be a clever debate point and morphs into a massive compliance nightmare. He didn't let up. Your endless stream of fundraising emails explicitly promises your donors that you are fighting capitalism tooth and nail. These everyday citizens sacrifice their $10 and $25 contributions because they genuinely believe they are financing a grassroots revolution. In reality, they are financing a political machine that casually drops $221,000 on exclusive private jets and burns through $53,500 at ultra-luxury 4-star hotels. When your financial solicitation explicitly promises to dismantle capitalism, but your official expenditure reports resemble the itinerary of a corporate billionaire, the FEC defines that as a massive discrepancy between solicitation and actual use. And federal discrepancies carry heavy consequences. Let me introduce you to a constituent of yours, a man named Danny Molina. Danny operates a humble auto repair shop in East Elmhurst, deep inside your district. He is 28 years old and grinds out $47,000 a year. Danny is a capitalist, not because he sits around reading Milton Friedman, but because he physically repairs vehicles, charges a fair monetary rate for his labor, and utilizes that profit to put food on his family's table. You arrogantly label his existence irredeemable. Danny just calls it a normal Tuesday. Furthermore, Danny submits his financial filings, his annual tax returns, with absolute flawless accuracy every single year. Every line is perfect. Every calculation is exact. Can you honestly say the same about your campaign's federal filings? The final sequence centered on the issue of urban unrest, and it was the sequence that irreparably shattered her facade. It brutally synchronized her radical rhetoric with her official documentation, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the two were vastly contradictory. In June of 2020, Shapiro began, you proudly published a tweet explicitly supporting the movement to defund the forces. Did you or did you not publish that statement? She tried to soften the blow, arguing she merely supported the reallocation of municipal resources toward community-based initiatives. Did you tweet in explicit support of defunding the forces? Yes or no, he demanded. The exact text of your tweet read, defund means defund, your word. Your tweet, your account. June 2020. Do you still stand by that radical demand? AOC abruptly stood up from her chair. Standing is her instinctual defense mechanism when she requires the physical environment to absorb her energy. Sitting implies a dialogue, but standing signals a monologue. She desperately needed to deliver a monologue because the claustrophobia of binary questioning was suffocating her, much the way a tight room suffocates a person desperate for space to move. Let me be abundantly clear, she projected, her voice echoing. I have consistently advocated for holistic community safety. The specific framing of defund was merely a broader movement phrase designed to spark a necessary reimagining of how we approach public well-being. Shapiro ignored the theatrics. Severe civil unrest and major offenses in your specific congressional district have skyrocketed by an astonishing 70% since 2019. Were you fundamentally aware of that specific metric? She froze. She did not provide an answer simply because she did not know the data. And being completely ignorant of the exploding unrest rate in your own backyard, especially after loudly championing the dismantling of local security forces, is a breed of political negligence that cannot be masked by a clever viral clapback. It demands a hard statistical fact, and she was entirely empty-handed. 70%, Shapiro repeated, twisting the knife. According to the official FBI uniform reporting data for your exact district, since you assumed office. But here is the critical part that truly matters. In your February 2025 newsletter, dispatched to your constituents and financial backers, you stated, and I am quoting verbatim, our community is significantly safer today because of the progressive investments we have championed. Your official communication utilized the word safer. The FBI categorically states that unrest is up 70%. That newsletter is actively distributed to your financial donors. Those donors write checks based entirely on the narrative you feed them. You explicitly assured them the neighborhood was safer. It is objectively not safer. It is, in fact, 70% more dangerous. That is no longer a simple ideological disagreement. That is a demonstrably false, fabricated statement embedded within a donor-facing communication, and the FEC enforces incredibly stringent regulations regarding exactly that type of deception. The auditorium fell into a stunned, heavy silence. It wasn't the anticipatory quiet of a crowd waiting for a witty retort. It was the collective shock of an audience that had just witnessed a podcaster with a Harvard law degree effortlessly stitched together a 4-year-old tweet a recent campaign newsletter, a devastating FBI statistic and a stringent FEC regulation into a lethal 9-0-second indictment. He hadn't made a wild partisan leap. He had drawn a perfectly straight, undeniable line. And straight lines, once vividly drawn on live national television, are impossible to erase. Cornered, AOC fought back using the only arsenal she possessed. She erupted with fiery passion, leveraging the full-body emotional force that had allowed her to survive brutal political combat for 7 years by simply being louder, faster, and more emotionally authentic than anyone else in the room. You want to talk about numbers? She shouted, her voice trembling with manufactured rage. Here are some real numbers. 40 million struggling Americans without basic health insurance. Where is your grand legislative plan for them? 600,000 citizens sleeping on the streets. Where is your comprehensive housing bill? You sit there with your smug yes or no demands, acting like you are the supreme judge of my career. You are not a judge. You are just a podcaster. You have never been elected to a single public office. You have never drafted a piece of legislation. You have never ground your shoes down knocking on doors. Don't you ever dare reduce my life's work to a simple yes or no. Her loyalists in the gallery erupted into a frenzied standing ovation. The sheer volume of their cheers filled the studio, much like her commanding voice always manages to do. Shapiro simply waited in silence for 3 seconds, his unique brand of terrifying patience. The Congresswoman correctly points out that I have never written a law, he stated calmly over the dying applause. She is absolutely right. I am not a member of Congress. She is. And in 7 long years holding that immense power, she has successfully written exactly 0. She calls me a mere podcaster. She is right about that as well. But this podcaster just had to educate a sitting United States lawmaker on the catastrophic unrest rate occurring in her own district, because the lawmaker herself was entirely ignorant of it. She demands that I not reduce her complex work to a yes or no. But asking yes or no is not a reduction. It is the ultimate test of accountability. Did you successfully pass the transformative laws you promised your voters? Yes or no? Do you possess a basic understanding of the statistical realities in your own district? Yes or no? Did your official campaign newsletter deliberately mislead donors by claiming the community is safer when unrest is up 70%? Yes or no? These are not malicious conservative tricks. These are the bare minimum requirements of public service, and clearly, the bare minimum is vastly more than this Congresswoman is capable of providing. Danny Molina, Shapiro continued, driving the final nail, files his taxes perfectly every single year. He knows his daily revenue down to the absolute penny. Danny runs a modest 2-bay mechanic shop and can rattle off every single metric vital to his business. The Congresswoman runs a massive congressional empire, draws a $174,000 taxpayer salary, controls a $15 million campaign war chest, yet cannot articulate the unrest rate in her own neighborhood, nor the basic financial cost of her signature legislation. Furthermore, her official newsletter, the exact document her supporters read right before pulling out their credit cards, boldly claims things that objective FBI data completely contradicts. If Danny Molina operated with that level of discrepancy, he would be ruthlessly audited and heavily fined. Meanwhile, the Congresswoman is simply running for re-election. When the moderator finally called for the closing statements, Shapiro went first. He did not bother summarizing the complex chains of logic. He simply said one thing. For 8 years, the Congresswoman dismissed this debate as mere name-calling. Tonight, the entire country discovered the real reason she hid. It wasn't because I am a bully. It is because I ask yes or no. And that binary format is the one place where millions of Instagram followers cannot save you, where snappy clapbacks fall flat, and where the most viral politician in America is finally forced to answer a question with a cold, hard fact instead of a fleeting feeling. But tonight wasn't just about feelings versus facts. Tonight was about federal records. Her newsletter told donors the community is safer. The FBI says unrest is up 70%. Her fundraising email cited a 1-2-year climate deadline she knew was completely false. Her campaign listed $221,000 in private jet spending, while she publicly assured donors she flies commercial. Each of those points is a massive discrepancy between what she told her financial backers and what her federal records show. And the FEC, not me, but the FEC possesses the ultimate authority to examine whether those discrepancies constitute material misrepresentation. I am just a podcaster. I cannot launch a federal probe. But 8 million people just witnessed these contradictions live on television, and 8 million witnesses are significantly harder to ignore than one podcaster with a microphone. AOC utilized her 3-minute closing to deliver a soaring, emotional monologue that predictably exceeded her time limit. She spoke beautifully about her Bronx roots, the sacrifices of her mother, and the inherent courage required to stand tall when the establishment demands you sit down. Under normal circumstances, it was the exact type of transcendent speech that fills massive arenas, brings people to tears, and turns strangers into dedicated donors. But tonight, bleeding from 90 minutes of unanswerable binary questions, her words rang entirely hollow. After the brutal exposure of the misleading newsletter, her ignorance of the local unrest rate, the fabricated 1-2-year doomsday clock, and the hypocrisy of the private jet expenditures she previously denied. Her speech sounded exactly like what Shapiro had diagnosed a desperate feeling deployed, where a factual number was required. She offered a beautifully constructed paragraph where a simple yes or no was the only thing the room truly needed to hear. She received her customary standing ovation, but applause and federal filings are two very different entities, and tonight the filings won. The true damage manifested in the weeks that followed. Shapiro had weaponized his platform to construct an undeniable evidentiary record, not a legal one, but one built from her own contradictions, instantly cross-referenced with federal data. 2 specific clips went massively viral, traveling along vastly different digital arteries. The first, dubbed the competence clip, showcased her total inability to price the $93 trillion Green New Deal, racking up 31 million views. It crossed party lines rapidly because it wasn't about politics, it was about professionalism. It triggered the universal cringe of anyone who has ever watched an unprepared colleague fumble a basic presentation. The second, the newsletter clip, paired her claims of a safer community directly against the FBI's 70% unrest spike. This 2-3 million view juggernaut didn't just entertain partisans. It circulated deeply within professional campaign compliance forums and FEC watchdog networks. The consensus among compliance professionals was totally unambiguous. A newsletter that promises donors the community is safer when FBI data shows a 70% increase in unrest is at minimum a material factual discrepancy in a donor-facing communication. And that specific phrase is the exact trigger for an official review. Within week 1, the National Legal and Policy Center filed a devastating supplemental complaint with the FEC, citing her own televised statements as concrete proof of material factual discrepancies in donor-facing communications. Simultaneously, an unprecedented 2,300 individual citizen complaints flooded the commission in a single week, a record volume that the agency procedurally could not ignore. By week 2, the House Office of Congressional Conduct received a formal ethics referral from a nonpartisan accountability group asking whether the communication constituted a misleading representation of district conditions to donors. By week 3, Danny Molina himself appeared on a local Queens broadcast, his hands stained with grease from his shop. "I know exactly what a brake job costs to the penny," Danny stated plainly to 6 million viewers. "She doesn't even know what her own bill costs." She calls my honest living irredeemable while she rakes in millions doing the exact same thing. I voted for her in 2020. I don't think I will again. Danny's frustration birthed a massive coalition. 47 local small business owners from her own district, people running auto shops, bodegas, and laundromats, drafted a public letter to the FEC. They didn't use legal jargon. They used the language of hardworking people who file forms for a living. They demanded to know why they are audited over a $200 discrepancy, while their representative raises $15 million, calls their work irredeemable, and seemingly avoids accountability. The 8-year excuse of name-calling had finally evaporated, replaced by the crushing weight of institutional scrutiny, a growing ethics file, and the anger of her own constituents. The ultimate question remained the exact same one she had run from for nearly a decade. It was always a simple yes or no, and after all this time, she still didn't have an answer.